Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
Hi, I'm Susan, and I'm a college counselor and have read applications for a small liberal arts college and 2 research universities. My twins are recent college graduates.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of 2 daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a wellness coach at Keenan Flagler Business School at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, a college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. This week in the news, we have a special treat for you. It's a double interview episode, and Andy Stricker is back. Andy's the Dean of Admission at Connecticut College, and we're doing a deep dive on athletic recruiting, focusing on athletic pre-reads. It's very timely. So I think you're going to really enjoy this, and it's going to run over multiple weeks. It's a long recording. We're breaking it down into bite-sized doses. And for our question from a listener, we're going to Oklahoma. Susan will join me as Jana sent in a great question, which simply asks us, how do I know whether or not the schools my student is looking at have quality teaching? So Susan and I will answer that question. And for our college spotlight, we got another brand new person up, and that's Kevin Newton back. And we're doing something creative here. Instead of focusing on one school, we're looking at all the universities in London. A big overview. You want to go to London? Let's find out what your options are. That's going to run over multiple weeks. And for our interview, it's part 2 of Carlynn Greene, author of Scholarship Algorithm. And we're looking at how to win outside or external scholarships, part 2 of 4. Friends, I'm going to be in California for almost all of September, 24 days. And because we have such amazing listeners, 4 of you reached out and said you'd love to host a reception. And you know, this podcast is mostly parents and college counselors. And so we have 2 college counselors who volunteered, and that's Stacy and Sylvia, and they're both in San Diego. And so we have receptions in San Diego on the 11th and 12th of September. And then we have 2 parents. We have Leanne in Santa Monica, who's hosting a reception on the 22nd of September. And we have Eunice, who's hosting a reception in Redwood City on the 19th of September. So we would love to have you come out. Ever since we started this podcast, our numbers in California are like triple the next state. So we know we got a lot of listeners there, and we'd love to meet you. So I will be at all 4. Sylvia, who you've heard on this podcast multiple times, will be at the one on the 12th. And then the one on the 22nd in Santa Monica, Vince and Susan will be there because our national conference, NACAC conference, is being held in Los Angeles. So you just go to yourcollegebounkid.com and you'll see the events tab and sign up. Be sure to put your name in. I've been looking at the signups and some people aren't putting their name in. Please put your name in. We're very excited to meet you. Now, it's been a while since I have given you an admissions tip, admissions vernacular, big number. It's because we kind of got into this format of like double questions, triple questions. But I'm yearning to give you some of that information, so we're going to bring it back today. So, admissions tip. I'm going to give you 2 tips to make up for lost time. So, create a spreadsheet to track all of the custom prompts, the school-specific questions. It's very helpful to have one big panoramic view of everything that's due. So, the company I founded, School Match for You, we use a standard spreadsheet, but I'll share it with you. It's easy to create, Excel spreadsheet. You know, first column, name of school. Second column, exact wording of the prompt. Okay, then you want the maximum word count in there. And then you want, how are you applying? Is it early action? Is it early decision? Is it rolling admissions? Is it regular admission? Is it early decision too? Okay, then you want the due date. And then your completion date, the date you finished that custom prompt. Now, there are a couple other optional columns that some people like. One is the material submission date. That's a date when everything has to be in. A lot of people don't know this, but for the vast majority of schools, your due date and the material submission date are not the same. That's just an optional thing. If you want to have that in for your peace of mind, it's when things like teacher recommendations and outside rec and counselor reps and transcripts and official test scores and things like that need to be received by the school. And another optional column that a lot of people do like to have is notification date. So that's when you find out whether a school admitted, denied, deferred, waitlisted, whatever their decision was. And those you'll have to usually do a Google search or get from the school's website. So you want to create that spreadsheet. It's very helpful to have a panoramic view of all of your assignments. Extremely helpful. So here's another tip. Divide all your schools into two categories. You've got the ones that are basically going to have deadlines between October 15th and December 1st. So that could be rolling admission, early action, early decision. And then you have all of the rest of the schools, which are basically regular decision schools, which will have deadlines in January or later 2025. And tackle that first group first. It's a way of kind of doing some project management and breaking this whole thing down into bite-sized doses. And then here's one more tip because I'm just tipping out today. So increasingly, schools are not putting all of those custom prompts, those college-specific questions, what most people call SUPs or writing supplements. They're not always putting them in the Common App. So if you see a school has additional writing requirements, you can either go to their website and look to make sure they're all listed there, because a lot of times they'll put them on the website, or you can reach out by email. You can just send an email to the general admissions email and just ask, are all of the custom questions either under the writing supplement section or under the college questions section? Or are there any additional writing requirements that I'm going to have to complete? It's not a good feeling when you think you're done and you pay the fee and you log in and you find an additional question in the portal. And I've noticed that's an increased trend. Some schools are upfront about it. They tell you right away, listen, there's another question you're going to get that you can unlock on our website after you pay your fee, submit your application. And sometimes it's just a surprise when you go into your portal. But it's not a bad idea to just check that out so you know absolutely everything that you have to do. All right, big number. Oh, sorry, admissions vernacular. Admission vernacular is PJ, and I know what you're thinking. Pajamas? Really stuck? No. How about professional judgment? Professional judgment. What is professional judgment? Well, I'm going to have an interview coming up for you guys with Bucknell's Director of Financial Aid. And we're going to look at all the different reasons why financial aid's all over the place, from school to school. And one of the reasons why is professional judgment. So there are a lot of things that aren't necessarily black and white, where an individual financial aid officer has the discretion to rule in a particular way, given the resources of the school and given the guidelines that are established for that school. And you don't hear that term a lot in admissions offices, but if you're to go to like a financial aid conference or interact with financial aid officers, they'll throw PJ out like EFC or SAI or, all the other common terms, EARD, ED that we so frequently use on the admission side. PJ, professional judgment. All right, the big number. Now, this gets me excited. There's only one thing I feel I enjoy doing more than college admissions, and our staff knows this, and that is philanthropy. I say if I ever hang it up and call it a day, it's because I'll go into philanthropy. And I'm hoping I can do that in about 15 years. I love to give money away. Of course, I only can do it on a small scale. But I get really, really inspired when somebody gives money away, especially for education. You may remember I was giddy with Mackenzie Scott and her largesse. and came on here multiple times to talk about what she did. Well, Michael Bloomberg deserves a mad shout out. I mean, the stuff he is doing through Bloomberg Philanthropies is ridiculous. He started out giving $1 billion plus, it was like $1.1 billion to Johns Hopkins. Like we talked about that. This is maybe now 3-4 years ago. It's the single largest gift ever given to an undergraduate admission office ever. Well, he's not stopping. And so in July, Bloomberg Philanthropies gave another $1 billion to Johns Hopkins, this time for med school. You wonder, like, what's up with Johns Hopkins? Well, it's his alma mater. And this gift he gave is going to make most students will be able to attend Johns Hopkins tuition free for med school. Oh my goodness. That place was already ridiculously hard to get in. Can you imagine now? Tuition free for med school for most students. And it's also going to provide additional financial support for living expenses for a lot of other students. Some of it's going to go for nursing, for public health, and other grad programs as well, targeting students from under-resourced backgrounds and middle-income backgrounds. Now, if you don't think that's enough, I mentioned on our podcast that Spelman College was founded in 1924, the elite HBCU right here in Atlanta, women's college. So what does that make it? It's a 100th anniversary. And what happened? About 4 months ago, they got the largest donation ever in their history, $100 million on their 100th anniversary. It was the largest gift ever given to any HBCU until now. Michael Bloomberg just gave $600 million to help med schools, HBCU med schools, of which more than 50% of Black doctors are trained at. So there are three very, very prominent HBCU med schools: Meharry in Tennessee, of which Fisk is a feeder into, Howard University, and right here in Atlanta, Morehouse School of Medicine. So Bloomberg's giving like $175 million to each of those. And there's a really smaller med school. It's been around forever. It's in Los Angeles. Charles Drew Med School. And he's given a smaller gift to them. And then Xavier University, the powerhouse HBCU for pre-med. They produce more Black doctors than any school pretty much every single year other than when Katrina. They're now launching their own med school, and Bloomberg's given a bunch of money to help them launch their own med school. Previously, they just had unbelievable undergraduate programs and, pharmacy, dentistry, pre-med, and the like. So shout out to Michael Bloomberg for $1 billion to Johns Hopkins and $600 million to HBCU medical schools. Wow, I am inspired. Okay, that's my big number. That's my admissions vernacular. And that's my admissions tip. But I'll be back with another tip in the recommended resource.
And now it's time for Hot Topics in the News.
Okay, friends, you're about to hear 5 or 6-parter with Andy Stricker on admission pre-reads athletics. I was talking to an avid listener, international actually, but her student is a student athlete. And she said, I love your podcast, but you guys really don't talk about sports that much. And it kind of bothered me because I pride ourselves on talking about all topics. And so we're going to try to make up for lost time. We're doing a real deep dive on athletic pre-reads. And normally I can tell you right away, it's a 3-parter, it's a 4-parter. I can't tell you that this time because we're recording it over 2 segments. We've already recorded the first 3 parts, and we're recording the last either 2 or 3 more parts tomorrow morning. So in part 1, Andy gives his background as it relates to varsity athletics. Andy tells us what an admissions liaison is. Andy tells us what an athletics admission liaison does. Andy tells us what an athletic pre-read is. And Andy tells us how pre-reads are done very differently at different colleges. Listen and enjoy. Friends, Andy Stricker from Connecticut College is back. Hi, Andy.
Hey, Mark. How we doing, man?
Hey, you're a man of your word. We asked if you'd come on every 6 months and do something for us, and you said yes, and here we are again.
100%, man. I'd be on every 6 weeks if you asked.
Oh, well, don't. You might have said the wrong thing there.
I know.
I'm
But trust
serious.
me, if there's someone who could say the wrong thing, it's me. So I got it. I'm used to that.
I'm gonna hit you up at least every 3 months now. There's a compromise.
Right.
We'll get you 4 times a year. I'd love it.
I love it.
You know, you kind of subbing for Dave, my friend who was on here for 5 years. So we thought today we'd talk about athletic pre-reads. You've always been involved in athletics, going all the way back to Kalamazoo College. Why don't you not give us the full bio, but just talk about the role you've played and how you've been connected to athletic recruiting kind of at every stop you've been at?
Well, the funny thing is I actually got into higher education as a coach.
Yeah.
So I spent 10 years serving as the head cross-country coach at Kalamazoo College in Michigan. About a third of my way through my tenure, the director of admission hired me, and I've kind of had my feet in both worlds since. So I've coached a number of sports. I've been the athletic liaison at Kalamazoo, Beloit, Ursinus, Guilford, and now at Conn. And I literally just got off the phone with the parent of a prospective Camel athlete. And I told his mother, I said, hey, listen, if team so-and-so is playing and I'm in town, I'm there. So I live and breathe Division III athletics. I did as a student athlete. I've done as a coach. I've helped out with a number of programs here. So athletics is near and dear to my heart. And it's something I spend a lot of time doing.
Well, I can attest to the fact that Andy backs that up because I have a student looking at Conn College this year.
Yeah.
And Andy said to me, make sure he tries to meet with me when he comes to campus. And I heard that a great visit with you.
Exactly. I sat right over there and talked with Nate from Philly just a couple weeks ago. It was great.
Yeah. Awesome. Great. So, let's start. You said you've been the athletic liaison at pretty much every stop. Some people might not know what that is. Why don't you tell our listeners what the athletic liaison is? And maybe different for different schools too.
Yeah,
the role you played.
It's plenty. It's different at different institutions, but the relationship between an athletic department and a coaching staff and an office of admission is absolutely critical, because we tend to think that recruiting student athletes is purely the purview of Division I athletics. But the reality is that even when I started coaching, which is back in 1996, Division III coaches were involved in the process of actively recruiting student athletes to come compete at their particular institutions. And as a result, there are two ways in which the relationship between athletics and admissions is critical. First is they're in some respects ad hoc members of the admission staff in many respects, because they are out there proactively contacting prospective student athletes, talking to them about the student and the athletic experience at a particular institution, and trying to attract them to a particular institution. And the other piece that is critical about the relationship is we want to recruit student athletes who fit an academic profile that would typically be what we would consider admissible. We don't want to recruit student athletes who are not going to pass muster in the Office of Admission evaluation process, are not going to be offered admission, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a real symbiotic relationship that exists between a coaching staff and the Office of Admission, and the people who typically facilitate those relationships are what we call athletic liaisons. So they are people in the admissions office who are specifically designated as part of their portfolio responsibilities to serve as the primary point of contact with an athletic department or a coaching staff or a particular sport, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's typically what an athletic liaison does. I'm the liaison for 8 sports here at Conn. I have 2 other staff members who also assist me in being liaisons for different subsections of our varsity athletic teams here at the college.
And what exactly do you do in that role?
Wow. Well, I know the topic of our conversation today is going to be pre-reads. So we do pre-reads, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But we will go to athletic department staff meetings and talk about updates and changes to the admission office. We will meet with prospective student athletes when they come visit. We do pre-reads. We do athletic committees, depending on how they're done at institutions when it comes to reviewing athletes. Anything and everything that involves the sharing of data back and forth, the consultation regarding student athletes, the recruitment of student athletes is coordinated by a liaison in the Office of Admission, depending on how institutions do it. Some have very robust sort of portfolios for liaisons. Some institutions, it's a little bit more limited. But in my world, there's very little that gets sort of engaged and involved in the recruitment of a student athlete that I'm not at least directly or tangentially involved with when it comes to my sports.
So would one thing be educating your coaches as to sort of what you're looking for in a transcript? Like, you're still the experts, but just giving some general sense so that they don't bring, completely unacceptable applicants to you? Is that part of what you see as your
100%.
role? Yeah.
100%. It's talking about academic preparation, what we're typically looking for in a transcript. In the last year, we spent a lot of time talking to our coaches about national landscape changes when it came to the admission world, when it came to the Supreme Court decision on affirmative action. We spent a lot of time talking to our coaches about what that meant for the admission process, how we were adapting to do it. We talked to our coaches about what's the quintessential academic experience at a particular institution. What type of students are going to thrive at a particular place? What type of characteristics have we found that indicate that a student is either A, not going to yield or not enroll,
Sure.
or B, not going to thrive here, and / are they going to transfer almost immediately? So there's a lot of back and forth that exists when it comes to academic characteristics, the quintessential student academic experience, national landscape changes, enrollment goals that are set by the president and the board of trustees. All of that goes into an educational component and a communication component between the admission office and an athletic department.
A couple more questions before we get to pre-reads. So is most of your communication with the athletic director or directly with different coaches in different sports? And has it been different at different schools you've been at?
Different at different schools. I typically like to operate in a fashion where I have a very strong relationship with the director of athletics. And here at Con, I have a fabulous relationship with our director, Mo White. She's incredible. But I think it's also really important to have individual relationships and conversations with individual coaches, because then you understand the underlying dynamics of the program needs, recruitment philosophies, things of that nature. Historically, I coached cross country, which is really easy. I just need fast runners. But as you move from sport to sport to sport, different programs have different philosophies and different needs on a given basis. And the best example I have is in the recruitment year for 2017-2018, our men's soccer team, which is one of our prominent programs here, we were in dire need of a goalie. We had struggled at the goaltender position for a number of years, and sitting down and having conversations with our head coach at the time, a guy named Kenny Murphy, we realized, hey, we need to make sure that not only we get one goalie in this class who's going to be our starting goalie, we need to get two goalies, a starting goalie and someone we've had a conversation with who's okay being the backup goalie for the next 4 years. Because it had become such a bit of a, we had a goalie get hurt, we had a goalie quit, and all of a sudden we're coming into the season without a whole lot of confidence in our starting keeper, and that becomes a problem.
That's such an example of institutional priorities, right? We talk about them, and sometimes it feels very amorphous, but there's a real concrete example of a very specific institutional priority.
Absolutely, 100%.
Before we get to pre-reads, and this kind of is a segue in, talk a little bit in terms of what communication happens with different coaches and different teams as to approximately how many spots they may get, and sort of talk about what that means, right? So there's communication about that, right? It's not the same for each sport. Tell me what that looks like. Tell our listeners what that looks like.
So I would say that individual sport needs are going to evolve and adapt on an annual basis. Similar to the example I just used when it came to, hey, we needed to get a goalie. If you're a basketball program and you realize that you're last in the league in rebounding, well, you're going to start recruiting some size one year. One of the things that's affecting us this year, frankly, is this is the last fall or the last year by which students who entered college in the fall of 2020 can use their extra year of eligibility that was granted because of COVID. So, for instance, we have a handful of athletes who have took a leave of absence during a particular semester and will return to us this year. And as a result, as we're navigating this roster bubble, as we would like to say, a particular program had less of a need for a large recruitment class this year. So as a result, they're bringing in a smaller class, which makes a lot of sense because they already have a significant number of returning athletes to their roster. So these conversations go on a weekly, a monthly, sometimes an annual basis regarding what's going on with a particular program. Maybe a couple, we bring in a class for basketball of 5 or 6, but 2 or 3 folks get injured. And as a result, that class, which was 6, is now only 3. We need to evolve and adapt our recruitment needs for the next year to balance out what's going on with a particular roster issue. So it could be positional, it could be roster size, it could be the extra year of COVID, it could be a particular program in an institution getting a significantly higher number of transfer students, and therefore their needs for first-year students are different. So these dialogues and conversations occur all the time, and program needs change sometimes almost instantaneously based on the actions of recruited student athletes, whether they were transfers or first-year students.
Yeah, and it's been my experience that a lot of coaches will be transparent with their athletes and say, "Listen, I get 5 slots, or I get 3 slots, or 2, or to be completely dependent on the sport."
Exactly.
Yep. So let's talk about pre-reads, because I'm sure there's a listener out there who wonders what's a pre-read. We can't assume everybody knows. Why don't you explain that for our listeners, Andy?
So a pre-read is the process by which a coach will gather academic information from a prospective student athlete and then submit it to the admission office for a read, an evaluation that will then inform the coach as to whether the student athlete lives in an academic zone by which the Office of Admission would be comfortable with that recruited student athlete, applying for admission. We're basically trying to give feedback to our coaches as to, hey, is this the kind of student athlete you should be recruiting? Yes or no? And in many cases, sometimes there are shades in between there. So that's what a pre-read is. And coaches are going to ask significant numbers of prospective student athletes to send them academic information because they're going to cast the net wide when it comes to academic characteristics, geographic characteristics, positional characteristics, to make sure that they fill their program needs by having enough volume at the top of the funnel, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
There are very few athletes who end up just looking at one school. They're looking at 10 or 12 or 14. And coaches need to understand that just because we ask for a pre-read with the student, they're also probably being asked for a pre-read by 10, 12, 15, 20 other institutions at the same time.
And both sides are doing the same thing, right? Coaches
100%.
have a big funnel because
Yep.
they can't put all their eggs in one basket, and students have a big funnel because they can't put their eggs in.
Exactly.
Yeah. Now, is it fair to assume if a coach says to a player, "I'd like to bring you forward for a pre-read," that the coach has vetted the student from a talent standpoint and feels like you're somebody who could help us? Or is that a leap?
I think it's a little bit of a leap.
Because it's done differently at different places.
Yeah, I think we want to divide things into binaries probably a little early. I know coaches that will not submit a pre-read until they have vetted a student athlete and are certain that the student athlete would contribute to the program. I also have known coaches that will submit a vast number of pre-reads, get the academic assessment information back, figure out who's in the neighborhood, and then go through an additional process of vetting. So I don't think we want to make an assumption regarding assessment on an athletic side simply because a coach asked for a pre-read.
And just with students I'm working with this year, I've seen it done both ways just this year.
Exactly.
So is it a fair question for a student who's told, I'd like to bring you forward for a pre-read, to say, what does that mean? Is that a fair question for the student to ask that?
I think that's 110% a fair question, 100% of the time. I think that students and families should ask plenty of questions in the admission process. Like, are you doing a ton of pre-reads, or have we already been vetted? I think it's totally fair to ask those questions on the front end, 100%.
Friends, this concludes the first part of my interview with Andy Stricker on athletic pre-reads, but we'll be back next week for part 2.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
All right, Susan, we have a question from Jana from Oklahoma. And, as she mentioned here, she's working with me, but she wanted to get the perspective of our co-host. So I'll play the question and love to have your thoughts.
Hi, Mark. This is Jana from Oklahoma. I realized I could ask you this question in one of our upcoming college counseling sessions, but I'd love to hear you discuss this question with your co-hosts. The question is, how can students and parents judge the teaching quality at the schools they are considering? For many, there's no more important factor in evaluating a school than the quality of teaching and the university's focus on the classroom experience. I realize that teaching quality varies from professor to professor and even year to year, but certainly there are schools at which the teaching is consistently strong and the leadership prioritizes the student's classroom experience. Various entities purport to rank the quality of undergrad teaching at a school, but are those rankings as mercurial and unpredictable as the publisher's overall rankings of schools? I'm hoping there's a reasonably efficient and meaningful way of researching and detecting a school's overall quality of instruction and classroom teaching while we are creating a college list, and certainly before selecting a college. If you have time and interest in discussing this question, I think all your listeners would learn a great deal, and I know I would. Thank you so much.
This one is a curious question, and I appreciate Jana bringing it forward because I think it's probably something that some people think about. I seldom have students that I'm working with ask me about the quality of undergraduate teaching.
Yeah, isn't it rare? Less than 1 in 100 for sure.
No, and occasionally, if a parent does, I love talking to them about it because they're often reflecting back on either their own very positive or very negative undergraduate experience.
Well, who I find asks me this is educators. Those are the ones that ask me this. The parents are educators. In fact, it's interesting how much educators have some just insights into schools by virtue of being educators. I find they go way beyond rankings in terms of what they see as qualitative.
Of course. Well, and I think, what are you paying for when you send your child to college, right? We get all hung up on the name game and the ROI, but really what we're paying is for them to become well educated. And every single high school student I have ever worked with in my entire career points first to teachers when they think about what was great about their high school experience, what turned them on to academics, what created their academic interests, their desire to go to college, their desire to study whatever it is that they're leading with as they apply to college. It's always their teachers. And, it can go both ways. I mean, sadly, but, that's the way it is. Teachers help us find our gifts, find our passions, rebound from setbacks and failures, They model intellectual curiosity for us and the joy of learning, and how education never stops, that education is lifelong. I'm thinking of and I tell you, those teachers were few and far between in my personal experience. Mark, I survived in spite of it, but I think teachers now they're still as influential as ever. So how do you do this when you're looking at a college? Well, first you have to clarify as a family, what are you paying for when you're sending your kid to college? And if you're paying for high quality, scholarly, inspirational teaching, then you've got to look at schools where the faculty are actually doing the teaching, right? And especially if first year students, because you know what? That isn't always the case. In fact, it's often not the case. And I will tell you one very short family story. I'm the youngest in my whole generation of cousins, and my eldest cousin was a very distinguished Harvard scholar. He was chair of the Harvard Graduate School of Education, actually, for many years. Very, very distinguished. So he was basically stolen away by the University of Michigan, paid a fortune to uproot himself from Harvard, as you can imagine, and moved to Michigan. Well, I'll tell you, it wasn't so he could teach undergraduates. He basically taught the doctoral students and supervised their scholarly dissertations. And the people who were in the classroom with the undergraduates were adjunct teachers, the adjunct professors, they were graduate students, they were all sorts of people. It's not, Carl Sagan at Cornell who's going to teach, freshman physics or things like that. And I once was talking to my cousin. I didn't know him very well, but we were at a family party, and he knew at the time that I was working at this wonderful small liberal arts college in Maine that only had undergraduates, right? And he looked at me and he said, I don't understand how a self-respecting scholar would waste his time teaching undergraduates. And my jaw hit the floor.
I'm sure it did.
It did. And I thought, well, this is a perspective. He's from a foreign land, as far as I'm concerned, because the liberal arts colleges of the world, and some of the universities too, are very clear about their commitment and priority to undergraduate teaching. So it just was a different perspective. Now, that was a lot of years ago, but I've never forgotten it, as you can tell, because I tell the story way too often. But it makes a point that this is an area where a prospective student needs to really spend some time on the website of the college and talking to enrolled students, maybe kids who graduated from their high school, a couple of years before, or maybe a connection that they can get through the admissions counselor. I had a student very recently really want to talk to some enrolled students about what was the field of study, art history, believe it or not.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, here's where you can start. I said, find on the website a professor in the department who teaches the classes and is doing the research that thrills you, that you can say to yourself, I can't wait to take those classes and see if I can be a research assistant to that in that professor's work. And email them and introduce yourself and say, this is who you are. It's what you're thrilled about. You saw on their webpage, on the college's website, what they're doing, and you had some questions, and would they be willing to spend 20 minutes with you on the phone or on Zoom or just an email? So this, to me, when it works, blows people's minds, because it's helping you in a way as a prospective student take the temperature of the faculty in perhaps a department that you might major in. Now, a lot of kids don't have the confidence to wade into that, but they might say, well, I'm visiting the University of Michigan to take a tour, and I'm planning on majoring in aerospace engineering. Is there a possibility of touring the department with a professor or even perhaps a student. There's some ways where you have to dig for that information. I love it when kids contact alumni from their high schools and just say, hey, I know you went to the University of Cincinnati and I'm taking a close look at it. We didn't know each other, but I know you're there. Would you like to talk? And, most students love to blab about their college experience because they're experts. They become experts. They love to talk about their university. And so they didn't know you because you were in 10th grade when they were a senior, whatever. Sometimes your high school counselor, your school counselor can put you in touch with people like that. And you can find them on LinkedIn, or I know I used to say Facebook, Mark, but us oldie goldies, right? The kids have ways of finding each other on Instagram or LinkedIn. But there's some cool stuff out there when you do that. I think another hard question to ask in the process is, when a professor is up for tenure at a university, on what basis are they evaluated? And I can tell you right now, it's usually teaching, research, and service to the college. And that I know from my years working at a liberal arts college, because we all every spring would wait with bated breath to see which of the young faculty who'd been there, most of them for 7 years, right? Tenure is usually, that decision is usually made at the end of your 7th year. So, if you can get information like that, it'd be interesting to ask admissions people. You wonder if they would know that. They should. But if a faculty member is being rewarded for quality undergraduate teaching as well as their research. I had another cousin, one of my many cousins in education, who went to Wesleyan University in Connecticut as a young English teacher. She had had a 2-year fellowship at another liberal arts college while she was getting her dissertation ready to publish, and then was hired by Wesleyan at an assistant professor level. So she had like 4 more years or 5 more years to go before she'd be up for tenure. And she was very clear when I asked her about it. She was very clear that her success getting tenure was going to be equally divided between her teaching acclaim and her research productivity. So she'd gotten that square between the eyes as soon as she got to that. And now Wesleyan is a liberal arts college, but it's a small university. So it would put itself in that unusual small university category. There aren't that many. They have Tufts and Rochester and there are a bunch in that unusual category. Another thing is reputation, Mark. And I think families can ask their school counselors, they can ask people like us who've been around for a while. And for example, in the Ivy League, we know that Brown and Princeton are very, very teaching focused compared to some of the other, and I don't know that intimately.
Yeah, I would say Dartmouth and Yale as well. Like, the interesting thing with the Ivies is the ones that are, I feel, the most teaching focused are the ones where the majority of the students are undergrads.
There you go.
Yeah. So when you look at the others, the majority of the students are grad students, and the majority are undergrads. It tends to be more of a focus on undergrads. So the percentage, it's a percentage of the students that are undergrads. A couple things that I find helpful here, and I've mentioned this before, but I really find it helpful because a lot of times when someone asks a question like this, they're still in the initial phase where they're still looking at 20 to 25 schools, and the idea of doing all this, reaching out and talking to all this, they're looking for more of a shorthand initial way of doing that. And maybe you do that for your last few schools where you're really serious. So, I love rate my professors. I really do. You look up all the faculty members in the department you're interested in, and then you go over there and you read what every student says about their experience. And it's a quick, fast way that you can do it. And the reason I feel so strongly about it is literally both my kids it never misled them, not a single time. They picked their courses that way. When it came to picking their courses, They looked at because it's set up really nicely because you can hear what do students say about the classroom experience. Of course, they have standard things in there. They're going to talk about, was the grading hard? They talk about workload, but was the teaching engaging, though, is one of the things that they rate on there.
That's right.
And was it interesting and engaging? And then they have stuff on, some other things. And then there's a prose section. But that's a great, fast, quick way to, especially when, there's been when the review is based on a pretty sizable number of responses.
That's important. It's very important.
Yeah. Like way back, one of our first interviews we had on the podcast was Dr. Josie Urbastando, who was a professor at University of Miami in the English department. And I just really think she's awesome and she does fantastic work. And I went in, and at the time, she had 24 ratings, 23 were the highest.
Wow.
And they were outstanding. And I was talking to her about it. She said, why is it not 24? But, that's the perfectionist in her. But I think that's a great shorthand way. And another shorthand way is NESI data. Why don't you talk about NESI data for our listeners that aren't familiar at all with that? They have some good qualitative stuff that gets beyond, superficial metrics. Anything you want to say at all on that, Susan?
National Survey of Student Engagement?
Yeah.
I think you better talk about that, Mark. I used to use it a lot, and then I found that a lot of the data was becoming pretty inaccessible.
Yeah, and some of it's older too.
Yeah, but I loved it because it got much more at indices of quality of undergraduate experience.
Exactly. And it's great, the questions that they ask on there. And a place where I tell people to go is the institutional research section on the website. Every school's got an institutional research section. And if you don't see a lot of good information there, that's somebody you can reach out to. Director of institutional research, or sometimes there's multiple people on the staff, and ask them if they have any studies that they've done. That, once again, there's some work involved in that. If you're looking at 20 to 30 schools and you're just trying to do an initial research phase, there's no substitute for talking to students when it gets down to the end. I mean, it's, to actually talking to students. And, I'm thinking of a student I worked with this year from the Metro Chicago area. He was quite strong. He cast a wide net. He did very, very well. He got in a lot of schools. But then when it came down to his finalists, he sat in the classroom. When he went to 4-admitted student visit programs, he sat in the classroom, and it completely elevated some schools and diminished others. So so those are things people can do.
Yeah, another thing, Mark, that you can do is look at organizations like the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching, at the professors that they have recognized. So there are a couple of educational organizations that give annual awards to college faculty members for undergraduate teaching. And I think that's another doorway you could look at. There's what is the other one? There's an organization called the Excellence in Undergraduate Teaching. And the only way that I can ever find that is by discipline. So like if I was working with a student interested in anthropology, I would Google on that. And then I'd go, wow, there's Bryn Mawr College, there's Beloit College. It's not all the giant research universities with a lot of graduate students. So you can turn up. I know on the Williams College website, they always boast the number of professors of the year award winners that they have on the faculty. And I'm not sure if that's through the Carnegie Foundation or not, but there are organizations out there specifically that ask for nominations and then give these recognitions to professors that are working with undergrads. So that's another interesting web research project.
It's amazing how important this question is and how rarely it gets asked. And I think the reason for that is I think people think they can just look at rankings and see it as a proxy.
Yeah, true.
Because I don't think anybody would say, well, teaching's not important. So then why is it so seldom asked? And I think it's because they feel like they can just exclusively rely on reputation or rankings. And you have to be careful with that. I'll give you a case in point. And boy, I hope that this doesn't come off critical, because there's so many things about Caltech that are really good. But if you compare Caltech to Harvey Mudd, they look similar in a lot of ways, right? Like they're both these math science powerhouse places with really bright kids that have approximately 1,000 kids, 900 to 1,000 kids. But Harvey Mudd focuses so much more on hiring faculty members that are great teachers.
That's right.
Where Caltech focuses on high-level researchers.
That's right.
And that's a big difference between those two institutions. And having spent half a day at each of them in the last 18 months, that was very apparent. Some of the research the Caltech kids is just incredible, high-level government contracts. But some of the kids would talk about having to self-teach themselves their courses because, they knew that this isn't where I came to have exhilarating teachers. Some of them I did, but some of them I didn't. But then at Mudd, not only did all the kids that you talk to talk about the quality of the teaching, but, this is a counselor fly-in program, so I got a chance to talk to a lot of administration. They just emphasize how you're not getting in here unless you can teach well. Like that's a calling card, and it's just an emphasis. So, but if somebody was just looking at rankings, and if for whom teaching was really important, they wouldn't necessarily pick that up. And I know there's a lot of great things about Caltech, so I don't mean to disparage Caltech in this. I'm just trying to make a comparison. I'm trying to compare two schools that on paper, similar size, both super selective, both STEM focused. You wouldn't be able to tell off of rankings which one was teaching focused. And that's really the reason I brought that example up. But I think that's why we don't get that question, is because I think people think they can just rely on rankings as an indication. Well, if it's ranked really high, it has to be really teaching focused. But we know there's many, many schools that think like your relative do. I mean, the whole adage a lot of times in bigger universities is publish or perish, right? And if that's how you're evaluated, then that's what your focus is going to be. So hopefully Jana would give you a few tips. And that's not to say there's not great teachers at research-oriented institutions for undergrads. Because
absolutely. And there is value if you're a scholar, if your career is in academic scholarship, then publication is a vitally important. You need to be contributing to the body of knowledge in your discipline, and it has to be original, at least in part. So I get that. And the thrill at small liberal arts colleges is that it's the undergraduate students who get to participate in that process and work in those labs, in those libraries, and they become the research assistants to those wonderful professors because there are no grad students.
It is a hallmark of the liberal arts. I mean, it not only are there no grad students, but they tend to be residential.
Yes.
They keep their classes small. It's an expectation that, you will interact with faculty. And
right,
teaching,
exactly.
And teaching does tend to be emphasized as an important component.
Right. Well, and Mark, let's not forget honors programs, because sometimes families that I work with who are targeting public universities, or they are targeting more moderately selective private universities where they are going to be at the top of the applicant pool and in line for sizable merit funding.
Sure.
Right? The honors programs can provide exactly what we're talking to, access to those terrific professors who are really, they're really in it to teach the high-level kids who are ambitious.
And especially honors colleges.
Yes.
Which are different than honors programs, where they've taken it and elevated. There's a dean. And one of the things about those honors colleges is the top faculty want to teach those kids.
Sure they do.
They want to teach those kids. So you're oftentimes getting exposed to the creme de la creme. And it's important that we mention that because, the honors college, the small liberal arts colleges, they may not have the majors that you want. They may want to be business and engineering, nursing, architecture, or you want big sports, or like so many people say to us, I don't want something the size of my high school. So it's important that we talk about the fact that there are plenty of other amazing teaching that's going on outside of those little small schools
Absolutely.
that we both like, but we know they're not for everybody. Yeah, honors colleges absolutely can be great. Sometimes the mid-sized institution can be good here as well, too. Well, hopefully this was helpful, Jana. What an amazing question. Thank you so much for sending it in.
Terrific.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, hopefully you enjoyed the first part of my interview with Carlynn Greene, aka the Scholarship Guru, as we do a deep dive into outside or external scholarships. In part 2 of 4, Carlynn discusses why students should prioritize local scholarships. Then Carlynn discusses what's involved in winning credit union scholarships. Then Carlynn talks about how to use Google to search for scholarships. Then Carlynn talks about winning scholarships from your local high school, and then winning scholarships from other high schools in the area. And then Carlynn talks about libraries and local newspapers as sources of scholarship. Then Carlynn talks about how college students should use their email newsletters from their department. Carlynn tells us when students should start looking at scholarships. She shares one of the biggest mistakes she sees students make, and she shares what she would do differently, knowing what she knows now. Carlynn tells us about scholarship committees. Who are they and what do they look for? Carlynn gives us a great tip for finding scholarships on Google. And then Carlynn tells us multiple tips about the essay writing part of the application. And finally, Carlynn shares advice about self-assessing if you're a good candidate for an external scholarship. Listen and enjoy. Now, one of the things that I always preach when it comes to scholarships is local, starting and immediately in your backyard. Do you also teach that? And that's a two-parter. What are some sources locally that you recommend people use to find local scholarships?
Yes, so I definitely recommend to start local. One of the biggest mistakes people do as to why they're never really winning scholarships in the first place is because they start off national. They're applying for like the really big and highly advertised scholarships like the one from Google and Microsoft and so forth. And of course, you can still apply to these, but these are going to be a lot more competitive. Most of the scholarships I won were local or specific to like my certain city, county, or overall state of Texas. And I would say, well, what was the other part to your question?
Yeah. So what have you found are the best sources for finding local scholarships? Because that's not necessarily what you probably found in scholarships.com.
Yeah, so again, tying back into those community foundations, your local professional organizations, or even local sororities and fraternities. Sometimes you don't even have to be a member of a specific Greek life organization in order to win. Like my senior year of high school, I won a scholarship from a fraternity despite being a woman. And with fraternities, those are like male organizations, right? And then my senior year of college, I won a scholarship from the AKA sorority. That was about like $1,000, and it really helped. And again, with that sorority, I'm not a member, but I still was able to win. So make sure to apply for scholarships from sororities, Greek life, or even like credit unions, your bank. Sometimes they have scholarships as well. But make sure you have your eggs in multiple different baskets so you can have a bit more variety in terms of how the results will end up turning out for you.
I know credit unions can be a really good source. So let's say someone says, oh, credit unions, I like that idea. My students have had a lot of success with credit unions. How do you recommend someone find out what scholarships are at a credit union, and do they need to only approach ones that their family have accounts at?
Yeah, so it depends. Some credit unions will be of where you can only apply for their scholarship if you are currently like with them, you have an account with them, or perhaps a family member does. And then others, you can apply even if you have no relation to them whatsoever. So it depends. And I hope that answered your question, though.
Well, it answered the one part. The other part was if someone is listening and they think, ooh, I think I'd like to pursue credit unions, how do they do it?
So I would say, like how to research them.
Yes. How would they find out which credit unions are offering them locally?
Yeah. So basically what you can do is go to Google, right? And say, type in the keyword credit unions. And then in parentheses, you could type in your state, right? So like, let's say Texas. And then from there, another parentheses for scholarships. And then as a result, as after you press the search button, right, your search results should be somewhat narrowed down to showing you credit unions within the state of Texas that have the keyword scholarship, meaning that they likely are giving out some sort of scholarship.
Let's talk about some other sources that some of my students have had success with. You're my second interview ever on external or outside scholarships. The last one was about 4 years ago. I had one of my students on here who won 10 herself over a year and a half. By the way, I encourage people to go back and listen to that. Her name's Kristen Mosley. If you go back to yourcollegebounkid.com and just hit the magnifying search bar and put in Kristen, it'll pull up and it says how I won 10 outside scholarships. But I'd say probably 7 or 8 of hers were local that she won. Now, one of the best sources for her and other students I've worked with was going to their high school, their school counselor. Can you talk about that as a source for local ones?
Yes, that is a great source. Now, unfortunately, not every school has a center or a particular individual, like a certain teacher or counselor who does a great job of that. So for instance, at my old high school, I was initially assigned a counselor who had little to no experience relating to like college applications, scholarships, and things like that. So I had to advocate for myself, right? So I instead went to a different counselor who I heard rumors of and knew had more experience with that. So he helped me in the beginning stages. So definitely use the resources that you have available to you. And also if your school, especially like at the university level, if they have an email newsletter within your specific department, like within my School of Journalism, they did an excellent job of constantly telling us about certain scholarships that were available or internship opportunities and so forth. So make sure that you're regularly checking that, or even having like a filter of where messages from that particular person who sends out those type of messages gets filtered into its own folder, so you're not like overwhelmed with all those other emails that you don't really care about, right? So that's some of my advice for that.
I'm going to mention 3 other sources that some of my students have had success with locally, and I want you to feel free to comment on any or all of them, whatever you want. So one is libraries, another is like local newspapers. And the third is not necessarily their own high school, but sometimes there's another high school that has like a scholarship section on their website. I know in Atlanta, there's a school that does a great job of having local scholarships up, but anybody can tap into that website. So any thoughts on either libraries, local newspapers, or other schools other than your own as a place to mine for local scholarships?
Yes, those are all excellent resources. And then tying back into like newspapers, which is like the news, right? Also check for like broadcasted news. So the very first scholarship that I won, I just happened to come across it. Like I was walking in my living room trying to get to the kitchen to get something to eat. And the news was on, and there was this lady who represented the nonprofit of that scholarship advertising the fact that they had a scholarship. It was very small, about $500, but I ended up applying for it. And after winning that, I kind of got obsessed with applying for even more. So that's how I got started with all of this. So that scholarship I won my junior year of high school. And then the other resource you said, libraries. Libraries are pretty good, but I would say that considering how optimized these algorithms are with these scholarship search engine databases, you're likely to find better results that more cater to you and your background in terms of eligibility. And then what was the third resource you mentioned?
Just sometimes other high schools other than your own, sometimes, they have a section on a school website where they list them.
Yeah, that's another great resource. So basically, let's say you're at a school that doesn't really do a good job of communicating scholarship opportunities or external ones, right? Well, you could go to the website of another university or another high school, and typically they would have like a portal, a page on their website listing all these different opportunities to apply for. So definitely take the time to look into that too.
Thank you, Carlynn. Now, Carlynn, when would you say is the best time to apply for scholarships? Because you talked about winning one junior year. You've talked about winning them spring of senior year. When do you recommend students start this?
Yes, so honestly, starting as soon as possible is very important because the earlier you get familiar with the process, the more likely you are to win. I would say summer is also an ideal time to apply because typically people are not really applying during the summer. They're vacationing, they're not thinking much of anything relating to their education, and so you might be more likely in turn to win scholarships as a result. And fall semester is also a very, very important time to apply because that's typically when a lot of the bigger scholarships, like those full rides or full tuition scholarships, are available. And just so you guys know, there is a difference between like a full tuition scholarship versus a full ride scholarship. Full tuition will cover like tuition and fees, all of that for like over the span of 4 years if it's undergrad. But a full ride scholarship, that could cover that in addition to housing, meal plan, and all these other things relating to your education. So make sure that you understand that difference.
Yeah, I refer to those as full cost of attendance. Yeah.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
Friends, my recommended resource for episode 457, if you go to the Common App and you go to your dashboard, in the far right corner, you'll see application requirements. You want to click that. There's some real valuable information there. Of course, you want to have all your colleges in your dashboard, but it'll list your colleges alphabetically. It'll list the type of institution. It'll list the different deadlines. So you'll be able to look right away on like a almost like spreadsheet format. You'll see if early decision 1, 2, early action 1, 2. You know, they'll have, if you see REA, it stands for restrictive early action. And then they'll have a regular decision, and they combine regular decision and rolling all into the same box. They also let you know the app fees, both for U.S. and international applications. And then there's some other information as well. So there's a section of the Common App called Courses and Grades. Most schools don't make you complete courses and grades, but some do. And so if any of your colleges require courses and grades, then that will be indicated right there in the Common App section. And then they'll have another box that'll say supplements, and it'll let you know if the school has like a portfolio requirement. And there's some more information in here. The testing policy is in here. It lets you know what tests they use, and there's links. You know, there's links to the testing policy. There's also a section called English Proficiency. And there's a link to what they require, for international students. Is it TOEFL? Is it Duolingo? Is it IELTS? I mean, what's going on with the requirements for English proficiency? And then you can go over, and there's a whole section under recommendations, and you can see what's required there. So it's a great snapshot view of all of your colleges, and it's at the press of your fingers, and all you have to do is press the button that says application requirements, and you can also download the grid. We'll now return to my interview with Carlynn Greene, and we're talking all things external and outside scholarships. Now, what's a common mistake that you see families make when it comes to scholarships?
Gosh, there are so many mistakes, but I would say by far the biggest mistake people would make is not advocating for themselves and not at least attempting to negotiate to apply for a scholarship if they are slightly ineligible. So about 3 of the scholarships I won, I was slightly ineligible. It said you have to have X, Y, Z, but I only had X and Y. And so because of that, since I was so close, I was like 80 to 90% eligible, I went ahead and emailed them and said, hey, I'm very, very close to being able to apply for this. Can I still apply? And simply because I reached out and they could tell how passionate I was about my future and career future and all that, they went ahead and let me do it, and I ended up winning. So definitely take the time to negotiate when you can.
Now, if you could go back in time before you won the 30 scholarships, what would you do differently when it comes to applying to scholarships?
Oh gosh, there's so many things, but the main thing would be one, applying for more scholarships my fall semester, even if that meant that I had to take the season off for marching band, because again, a lot of those full ride scholarships are available around that time frame. They have their deadlines during that time frame, and then also applying for more schools, because 9 times out of 10, when you hear these stories of students winning millions and millions of dollars in scholarships, they applied for like 10 plus schools, and they're adding up the total amount of money that they got from each school, and then they're comparing the financial aid offers they got from those schools to negotiate for more money from the school that they actually want to go to as their top choice. So definitely do not repeat my mistakes if you're still on that specific timeline of still being in high school and you have the time to go about doing that.
Carlynn, let's talk a little bit about scholarship committees. Talk to our listeners a little bit about what scholarship committees are and what are the things you found that they look for.
Yeah, so scholarship committees are basically the people who are evaluating the applications. They might even have you go through an interview phase, whether that's virtually or in person. It just depends. And in terms of what they're looking for, sometimes they even have this outlined within the application or within their terms and conditions. Oftentimes people see terms and conditions on a website and they don't really click on that tab, redirecting them. But for scholarships, I highly, highly recommend that you do so, because typically within there is a section that says judging criteria, and that will tell you how exactly they are grading who would be like on the highest tier. And the judging criteria would tell you basically who exactly is their ideal applicant and more likely to be winning that scholarship in comparison to others applying. So definitely look into that. And then also, let's see, when it comes to these scholarship committees, take the time to research their values, right? So for instance, tying back into a business grant that I won from TikTok, it was like a $50,000 grant. Before I went about my application for that, I first looked over like the background of not only TikTok, but the other company that was giving out that grant. It was called Macro. It's one of these major film production studios, right? They've produced a lot of films that have been like Oscar and Emmy nominated. But anywho, I looked through their work and I was like, okay, since these are their specific values, I have to make sure that within my application that I communicate that I am aligned in some way to what like their values are, their target audience, and so forth. And as a result, I was able to win that grant. And I also use these same strategies within scholarship applications.
This is great. So about how much time do you recommend people put into their scholarship search? Like you said, around one a day. Around how much time would that take?
So it just depends. So if your major is fairly, how do I say this? If your major is something that is highly sought after, like if you're going into STEM, right? It's going to be a lot easier for you to find scholarships that are more catered to you. But if you're going into something like architecture or a certain field that doesn't necessarily have as much funding, it might take you a lot longer to find yourself, to put together a dedicated list of scholarships to apply to. But I know from my experience in terms of researching scholarships, to research and have a list of about 50 scholarships, that would take me, give or take, around 4 hours.
Wow, that's pretty fast.
I'm a fast researcher.
Yeah.
It does help to learn like keyboard shortcuts and keyword optimization on Google, so you can narrow down search results for yourself even faster. And another tip for finding scholarships like on Google, make sure that you're not only looking at like the very first 1 or 2 pages of results that pop up. Make sure you're also going to like the 10th or the very last page, because those results might have like less people applying to those specific opportunities. Like for instance, one of the scholarships I won, it was from the Floyd Mayweather Foundation. He had a scholarship for women in media, and I went to like the 8th or 9th page on Google, and as a result, I was able to find his scholarship and win it.
Wow, that's awesome. Talk to me a little bit about the writing process. So from your experience, do most of the scholarships involve an essay? And if so, what are some tips that you have for writing? I know for Kristen, who I interviewed, a former student, she felt one of the reasons why she was a lot more successful toward the end than the start was she started changing her writing and how she targeted her essays compared to at first where she was very general. Do you have any tips or thoughts on the writing piece?
Yes, so that is by far the most important part of your application. So for one, you can implement within your writing scarcity and urgency, which is often used in like marketing, right? And so when I edit students' essays, especially for whatever reason, most of the essays that I edit are from nursing students. Maybe I've been recommended by someone, I don't know. But I always implement scarcity and urgency within their writing. So basically, as you already know, like nursing school, medical school, people tend to have high stats. And so you need to be able to communicate in a way that shows as to why you specifically are needed more in comparison within your field as opposed to those competing against you. So that shows scarcity and urgency. I can go more into detail about this. There's so much that goes into it, but definitely make sure to do that. And then another thing that can also help with your writing is not feeling as if in order to win, you have to trauma dump. I will say within my very first scholarship essay, I did trauma dump. Not too proud of it. But then after that, the other scholarship essays that I wrote, I did not feel comfortable sharing that part of my story. And so I instead talked about my passion for journalism, how that surfaced due to like recent events relating to the news, how I was hoping to, again, uniquely contribute to the field and help others get into the field, whether that's like those who are also within my demographic and so forth. So there are other ways to go about your writing. And a final tip relating to essays, I would say, please grammatically check your writing. You could use a free software called Grammarly. That's what I would often use to check for grammatical mistakes. And also another tip, I know I said that would be this final one relating to essays, but here's another.
You're on a roll. We love it.
Here's another
More the
one.
merrier.
Make sure, preferably, do not start off your essay with saying, "Hi, my name is," or basically just reiterating word for word what is said within the prompt. Your overall essay should already communicate indirectly you addressing the prompt. So those are my tips there for now.
Do you feel, Carlynn, like a student can look at a scholarship description and self-assess whether or not they're a good candidate, or is that more difficult to do?
Yeah, I would definitely say you can self-assess whether you are a good candidate and whether or not you would be more likely to win that one. So generally speaking, the more specific a scholarship is to your background, the more likely you are to win. Whereas if it's very broad, like it says anyone in the nation can apply, there's no age limits, there's no limitations on what specific majors, your chances of winning that specific scholarship are going to be very, very slim. Of course, there are legitimate opportunities and people are actually winning them, but nine times out of 10, the main people who are winning those ones that are very general are like the students who go to some of the top schools. So like, let's say the Ivy Leagues and so forth. But if you're going to like a state school and you're majoring in something that some people might not think is as important to society to function, then your chances of winning those type of scholarships that are really broad and open to anyone tend to be considerably less.
Friends, this concludes part 2 of my interview with Carlynn Greene, a.k.a. the Scholarship Guru. Hope you'll join us next week for part 3 of 4.
And now it's time for our College Spotlight of the Week.
And friends, I guess this is, I don't know how many parts each segment is episode, because just like with the Andy Stricker, we're recording it over 2 segments. Kevin Newton and I are recording his deep dive looking at the universities in London in 2 segments. We've also recorded 3 parts already, but we're recording either 2 or 3 parts more. But I hope you enjoy as Kevin gives us a panoramic view of all your options if you want to go to college in London, England. Friend, super thrilled. Kevin Newton is back. Kevin, you're getting close to double-digit appearances, man, and we love it. Feedback is great every time we have you on. Yeah, I'm glad you're here for it. So I'll just give a little bit of intro. A lot of people find London really appealing, really attractive. It's such a major city in the world. And I know I personally get asked about the university in London a lot. So I asked Kevin, give us an overview of your options if you know you want to go to London, but you're not really sure what your options are. So Kev, take it where you want to go, my friend.
Yeah, and Mark, it's always great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank
again.
you.
You know, what everyone's missing is the solid 20 minutes Mark and I spend cutting up before we hit record.
Yeah, and we wish we had more. If we didn't have a meeting on our calendar right after, we would go longer.
Yeah, it gets a little long-winded from both of us. So I think what the best way to approach the idea of university in London is to kind of split it up into 4 distinct categories, 3 of which I want to talk about. The 4th are those American-style universities in London, places like Richmond or Northeastern's campus. They are a weird hybrid, and if enough people want to call or write in to warrant a conversation about them, we can certainly talk about them in the future. It's just what I've found is once people start exploring universities in London, those kind of fall a little bit off their radar. They're what gets them in the conversation, but not exactly keeping them around. So instead, I kind of categorize universities in London in 3 broad groups besides those. There are the elite universities, the ones most people, who follow anything about European or international admissions have heard of. There are 4 of those. They're part of the the Golden Triangle with Oxford and Cambridge. They're Imperial College London, University College London, King's College London, and the London School of Economics. I think we've already talked to some degree about LSE, and I'm pretty sure we talked about UCL way back when, about their liberal arts and science course, at least more than a couple of minutes. But the other 2 groups are the rest of the University of London, and then these non-University of London universities. And I feel, Mark, something I love about this podcast is we acknowledge the really competitive, the name brand. I'll leave it to you to come up with the correct nomenclature, but the places that, outside of, say, college football and March Madness turn heads. And there's something to be said about these other places. So
there's so many names for them, Kevin, and I mix and mingle. Sometimes I call them sweatshirt schools, bumper sticker schools. There's a lot of names for them.
Well, I can tell you that, all of these look good on a sweatshirt. In fact, it's something that's kind of interesting is the most popular sweatshirt design for British schools tends to be the same with just the university name different. So it's University of, York, University of Sussex, wherever. But anyway, so, I think we'll just briefly, because we've already talked about at least 2 of them, discuss the table leading schools, the ones that are at the top of their research game. And like I said, these are Imperial College London, which is really like the MIT or the Caltech of the UK. They only do STEM and business. There's the London School of Economics. Technically, it's the London School of Economics and Political Science, which we've talked about at length before. But then there are these other 2, University College London and King's College London. And here you're going to find what we more or less think of when we think of a major research university here in the US that's broad-based. They study a lot of different things, and they're pretty well known in their respective circles. In fact, the King's College London War Studies Department, it's their program that centers on the study of conflict. It's one of the more highly respected bachelor's, master's, and even PhDs here in the US in policy circles. So it's a great foot in the door for those kinds of jobs. But these are places that you've got to have upper 30s or low 40s on your IB, or a number of 5s on your AP exams. They're great places, but they're not for everyone, and that's okay. So again, these are places that typically are in the global top 20. more than happy to talk about them in the future. But I really think some of the coolest options, and I could be very biased here because I went to one of them for my master's degree, are in those next two tiers: the rest of the University of London and the non-University of London programs. So we'll start with the University of London. It's kind of like the University of California in that there are a lot of different campuses and they're all independent, but they're under the same federal system. But instead of spanning across the third biggest state in the country, they're confined to the city of London. Technically speaking, UCL, King's College, and LSE are all members of the University of London. Imperial College was until about 2008, then they dropped out. And they're specialist institutions as well as more generalist institutions. So I think the coolest name at the University of London, it's one for master's and PhD degree students, is the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, which I have no desire to study public health. That's more Julia's field.
So, Kevin, do these, you say they're more specialists, so would they have limited majors? Like a lot of people don't know, a place like Georgia Tech just has like 35 to 40 majors for the whole school, where, there's other schools that have like, quadruple that. Is it that they have limited majors, or is it more that now they have the broad swath, but they're really, really just known for certain things?
It's a bit of column A, a bit of column B. It's more of what the research is leading. So outside of the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and again, someplace like LSE that's still technically part of this, I point to where I went to grad school, the School of Oriental and African Studies. As the name suggests, they're only concerned with events going on in Eurasia and Africa, and really not even the European part of Eurasia. So within that realm, you can find programs that you're not going to find anywhere else. It's a very short list of places in the global West that are going to allow you to get a bachelor's degree in, say, Indonesian. It's a very short list of places that are going to allow you to study Old Persian or Sanskrit to a degree level, and certainly to a PhD level.
How many schools would you say are in this middle category that are kind of, they're not necessarily the sweatshirt schools, but they're just outstanding institutions with real concentration in their area of specialization? They're as good as it gets, right? And they're as good as it gets in their area, and they have some real specializations. How many of them? And these are all in London? All these different schools are all in London?
The whole University of London. Now, they are kind of, shall we say, generous with the definition of what's in London. So, sure. For example, there's Royal Holloway, which is certainly in the suburbs, and it is a very picturesque, very bucolic community. It's about 30 to 45 minutes outside of downtown London. So you're going to be taking the tube easily, and 30 to 45 minutes is putting it very generously.
Why don't you talk a bit about the tube so people understand how the tube works?
Right. The London Underground, it's the oldest subway system in the world. I, having lived in London for a number of years and then having lived in Washington, D.C. for a number of years, I'm not ashamed to admit I carried out a one-man campaign of the D.C. Metro can be better. For proof, you don't even have to look to New York. You can just look at London. It's quirky. It is a little expensive to ride. So everyone who's there for more than a couple of weeks learns how to use the buses, which gets you around it extremely well. And, you get the added benefit of the double deckers, which is just lovely. I don't care how old you are. That's still fun.
It's true.
But it does mean that you can move across, a relatively large metro area with relatively ease. And especially if you're in Zone 1 or Zone 2, the two central zones. Royal Holloway is further outside than that, but a lot of the other University of London programs are within that zone, or within those zones. You can move around pretty quickly. So back to your question about, the sweatshirt schools versus where really specializes. So, and again, I'm very biased that I think that SOAS is great for anything in the humanities or social sciences outside, the Western Hemisphere. But just next door to SOAS is Birkbeck, which has kind of two odd responsibilities within the grand scheme of things. One of these is that it was set up as kind of the night or evening university for Greater London, but they have a remarkably good philosophy department. Just a tier below some world-leading philosophy departments.
How would some of these schools compare to the top U.S. schools further, like in their area of concentration? Like, can they compete as well as any leading U.S. institutions for these real specialized fields?
I can tell you from my past life, and that little continuation that I can't give up, because once you're in it, you're in it, of anything in international relations or global affairs. SOAS turns heads just as well as, say, Johns Hopkins SAIS, or Fletcher at Tufts, or School of Foreign Service at Georgetown, or I'm trying not to say that place in Cambridge, Massachusetts, but it
Sure.
stands. It's turned a lot of heads and opened a lot of doors.
I know I'm just peppering you with questions, but I asked you one and never gave you a chance to answer it.
You're fine.
How many schools are we talking about that are in this category of like in London or Greater London? Not necessarily Sweatshirt or another name. I use all kinds of names. Like sometimes I call them the one percenters. It's just my own term. They're not like one of the one percenters or Sweatshirt school, but they're just fantastic schools that have concentrations that in their area of specialization, they are top tier. They are one percenters in the world, really, without maybe the national cachet, maybe. But how many would you say were in there?
It's really subjective, but I say you're easily at, depending on how you count them, between 6 and 10, depending on the specialization.
Wow.
So to continue with some other University of London programs, one that kind of straddles between, because it's technically part of the Russell Group, which is that really research-intensive group of universities that likes to portray itself as the best universities in the UK, is Queen Mary University of London. And a lot of my humanities degree students love it there. It's quirky, but it's still a top tier degree. For finance students who maybe they don't have a shot at LSE, or maybe they don't want LSE, or maybe they want someplace that's a bit more practical, there's City University of London, which is located in the old square mile of London, the financial center, and is just flush with all sorts of research opportunities. So, or excuse me, not research opportunities, but internships with banks and insurance companies and private equity firms. And, so if money's your thing, City should be on your list. And again, it's not a place that's going to necessarily, you're not going to find the College Confidential crowd talking about City University of London, but you're going to find the hiring directors at banks and insurance companies talking about it.
Sure. When you look at this middle group, is there diversity? I know you've already said there's diversity in location, because some of them could be 30 to 40 miles outside the city, but they're going to obviously they're going to capture on that name London, and I'm sure many are London proper. Is there diversity when it comes to size of school within this group? Are they pretty, much in the same range? And what kind of population are we looking at for a number of students, in particular like undergraduate?
Great question. So it does range considerably. One thing I would caution on is still you're going to a place that's in a lot of cases, not every case, but in London, which is one of the biggest metro areas in the West. So if you're looking for some place that's more like, shall we say, Rhodes College in Memphis, even
Sure.
that's still downtown Memphis. But if you're looking for some place that's like James Madison, which Harrisonburg's not a big city, but it's, this isn't it. But the kind of campus size and class sizes do range. So as is one of the smaller ones, for example, and there's, I think, 4,000 or 5,000 undergrads.
And you're showing your Virginia roots there on the James Madison. There are a lot of people don't know James Madison, but
I went with James Madison over, and I'm blanking on it, but there's a university in Farmville in Virginia, and I feel terrible about it, forgetting it. Or, shoot, here in Dallas, there's a big difference between SMU and Tarleton State University, which is 2.5 hours west of here, and has a really great rodeo team, but isn't even 2.5 hours away. You're not seeing a lot of you see enough Tarleton State sweatshirts, but still a great school. I say that because one of my wife's best friends went there, so I'm obliged, or obligated rather, to say that. But to some rather large universities, UCL is massive. But, when it comes to things like class size and things like that, you're still going to find the opportunity to be in similar class sizes. There are certainly smaller seminars, there are larger lectures. You can kind of find your own way. So there's still a lot of diversity in types of university. I mean, at one end, City University of London, like I said, is in the square mile. You're going to pass the quarter zips and the Patagonias every day on your way to school or on your way to class. A few miles away, Queen Mary University of London is in the East End. And the East End isn't what it was in, say, Jack the Ripper's day, but it's certainly the way some of my students have described it. I'm just going to quote them on this, is it feels very artsy Brooklyn. So for some students, that is a great fit. For other students, they want no part of it.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. I can visualize exactly what you're talking about when you put it that way. Friends, this concludes the first part of Kevin Newton's deep dive on options for someone who wants to go to university in London, England. We hope you'll come back next week for part 2. On Monday's episode, I'm going to take a QFL that came in that I'm chomping at the bits to answer. It's kind of a follow-up. I did a deep dive a while ago on money, and particularly how you need to be concerned if they're two parents and they're either never married, separated, or divorced, and how CSS profile schools oftentimes will require that non-custodial parent to fill in that information. Well, a listener wrote in and said, well, what happens if they won't do it or if you can't find them? And all these sort of situations in the gray area. And it's a super important question. It's something that I've encountered a lot in my career, and I want to answer that. So I'll answer that for you guys on Monday. And then we have a brand new interview that Vince Garcia, our own Vince Garcia, did, which I'm very, very excited. And it is with Sarah Lovely, and she is an expert on admission and the arts. So we're talking, it's a panoramic view of performing and visual arts. So, they talk drama, they talk dance, they talk music, they talk art, and what artistically oriented students need to know about the admission process. And so that's, it's either a 4 or 5 parter. I think they went almost 2 hours. It was a lengthy interview. And so you're going to want to join us on Monday for that. And friends, remember, college is a match to be made. It is not a prize to be won. So put some time into finding out what the right match is for your student. You're looking for an academic match, a social match, and an emotional match, a financial match, and a career match. See you Monday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us, and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 15. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Linda Depker, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joy Stucker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stylianos Dimitriou. And if you want to have a coaching session with Lisa, Linda, or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Our favorite method is for you to record your own voice at speakpipe.com/YCBK. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcasts. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Monday and Thursday.